Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch Podcast. That is, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch Podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot with Kate Odell and Kim Strassel. And Kim, one other thing I wanted to talk about, which is you've done some reporting on, which is the fact that one of the agreements that the Speaker made with the other Republicans is to set up an investigative subcommittee that will look into what they're calling now the weaponization of government. What will it look into? Who will it be investigating? And who do they think did the weaponizing?
Yeah. And by the way, there's still some lack of clarity about where this is going to sit, because one of the negotiations that was going on during the drama of last week was whether this committee would be under the auspices of the Judiciary Committee as a subcommittee, and thus largely in the control of Jim Jordan, who's going to be running the Judiciary Committee, or whether it was going to be a standalone select committee, which is what some of the rebels wanted to have it be. And then they would presumably have one of their own leading it rather than Jim Jordan. I am still not sure where that landed. I mean, it kind of got lost in this agreement between McCarthy and all of the holdouts has still not been made public. So it's still not entirely clear what's in all of it. But it'll be set up in some form or fashion. And yes, it's going to be looking at the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, various other operations of the Biden administration that Republicans feel have been getting engaged in politics when they should not be. In the FBI's case, that would be looking at everything that went on with the Trump-Russia collusion scandal, also allegations that it engaged in suppressing the Hunter Biden investigation. There's also, and the reason they called it the weaponization of government is they wanted it to be more broad. So efforts for the FBI and other agencies to work with big tech to censor Americans, and the list goes on. It's going to be very sweeping, very rolling. I think that there's a bit of a concern about that because there's a possibility that it's just running all over the place, looking at everything rather than a more kind of targeted expression of what is happening. I mean, I heard some people say, well, we got to look at the IRS and how it's doing its audits. I mean, this could become a little sweeping and sprawling in the end. In my mind, it needs to be focused. It needs to be giving people information about what happened in some of these scenarios, because we're still just lacking basic details about what actually happened and who should be held account for that.
And is Jim Jordan going to run this?
Well, again, that's unclear. If it's underneath the Judiciary Committee, then he'll have ultimate authority for it. And one of the arguments for keeping it there is that you'd be able to get it off the ground right away, meaning it would be able to leverage the resources that already exist in the Judiciary Committee, rather than if it was a standalone select committee, kind of in the model of the January 6th committee. You need to hire all your own staff. You need to set the whole thing up. It needs money. And so, again, still trying to figure out where it's supposed to be.
All right. Well, that could certainly yield fireworks and maybe even some insight across the next couple of years. Let's turn to a second subject, and that is President Biden's trip Sunday to the border, specifically to El Paso, Texas, where he walked along the muddy portion of the border. He looked and examined a processing center for migrants. Didn't apparently speak to any migrants, but he gave no public remarks, but he was there for about 4 hours. And when he arrived in Texas, he was hand-delivered a one-page letter from Texas Governor Greg Abbott, which was not a "Hail fellow, how you doing, mate" letter. It led off with the following: "Your visit to our southern border with Mexico today is $20 billion too little and 2 years too late. Moreover, your visit avoids the sites where mass illegal immigration occurs and sidesteps the thousands of angry Texas property owners whose lives have been destroyed by your border policies. Let's just say it does not go uphill from there," as a welcome to the president. Kate, I guess the question is, so why did the president go down there if he was going to get this kind of welcome? He's trying to solve a political problem here?
Yeah, Paul, I mean, I think that's the best way to look at it, is that I would take this as one more indication that he's running for re-election, because he has not been eager to visit the border. The administration originally made it part of VP Kamala Harris's portfolio, which I think is a testament to how unseriously they took it. And now 2 years in, he's stopping by to do this sort of rehearsed visit. It has not seemed to produce much intangible results. His speech about this last week was just boilerplate about demanding comprehensive immigration reform with really no good faith efforts to work with Republicans or maybe get a discrete deal on worker visas or other topics where there might be some ability to agree. So I think this is largely a political exercise, and I don't expect to see much substance come out of it.
Kim, one of the things that struck me was that Anthony Gonzalez, Texas congressman, who's for immigration reform, he's somebody on the Republican ranks who could actually be winnable in a bipartisan deal, but the president didn't invite him down to travel with him on this. You know, if you're reaching out to Republicans because you want to get something done, and the president said in his remarks last week, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, blamed Republicans for what's happening on the border. You'd think you want to get Gonzalez and some others there.
Yeah, it was really quite striking watching him step off the airplane there, accompanied by 3 Democratic congresspeople who represent border districts. That's great. You know, Henry Cuellar, Representatives Escobar and Democrat Gonzalez, and not have Tony Gonzalez from the Republican Party from Texas, who has toured the entire 2,000-mile length of the border. And this is, to me, fundamentally the problem with Biden's approach here. Almost the day after he took office, he put out this, quote, comprehensive immigration proposal. It was absolutely wild. It was a non-starter with any Republicans in the Senate or the House. And of course, the White House knew that. He said he was going to make it a priority, but he has then spent 2 years largely ignoring the situation and, in fact, taking actions by ignoring it that have made the situation worse and therefore poison the well even further for some sort of cooperation. So to now turn around and say this is all Republicans' fault, and unless they bite and agree to do everything that I asked in my comprehensive immigration proposal, it will continue to be their fault, is really quite outrageous. But it's sort of the way the Biden White House operates. It's always somebody else's fault. And this is a strategy they use, which is to say, do it our way or you'll be accused of doing nothing.
I saw on the Sunday shows Angus King, the independent senator from Maine who caucuses with Democrats, saying, oh, he really thinks there's a big chance of getting a bipartisan immigration deal this year. And I have to say that I am skeptical, in part because the president hasn't made any beyond the proposal that Kim mentioned from the first week in office that has no chance of passing. He hasn't been willing to do some of the hard thinking and decision-making that'd be required to get this to a place where you could maybe get a bipartisan deal. For example, there's no proposal coming out of the administration to do anything to make a more realistic definition, provide a tangible definition to what the law says when you're claiming asylum. It's the credible fear standard you have to pass, and that is, in practice, a standard that kind of amounts to a wave them through standard while they wait for a formal hearing. If you pass that low threshold, then you can move into the country, come into the interior, and after a certain period start to work. And of course, the tribunals that hear asylum claims can sometimes take years, and many people just never bother to show up again until you take that kind of thing seriously. Hard to imagine any deal getting done.
Yeah, Paul. I mean, I'm not sure how much of a good faith effort we can call it if you blast Republicans as extremists and then say, but I'm really hopeful that we're going to get a deal.
Now, it doesn't work with you, that, good cop, bad cop, and the same guy.
It's not a page out of Dale Carnegie. But I also think that, to your point about the asylum process, there's no concrete proposal for improving that process so that so many people don't have an incentive to just claim credible fear, pass that test, disappear into the interior. But by comparison, Paul, it is relatively difficult to get a legal working visa. So the incentives are just completely perverse. And that is how you end up, as we have with, I think, 2 million over the past year of a surge that we haven't seen in decades. So there is a natural deal there to rationalize the immigration system, but the politics are so poisoned and dispiriting to see the president just continue to contribute to that.
Well, on that joyous note here, an optimistic look at the 118th Congress, I guess we'll have to call it a day. We shall be back every day for more editions of Potomac Watch. Always a pleasure to be with you, Kate and Kim. Always a pleasure to have you, dear listeners, listening. And please check in with us tomorrow for another edition of Potomac Watch.